buffer time? What is buffer time? Is what buffer time?
Greetings again, Buffer Timers. We're here this Sunday, an hour early, to talk about Profit and Lace. We're going to go around clockwise and introduce ourselves really quick.
Hello. Hello. I'm sorry. Let me take this thing off because it's not on my eyes anyway. I had this invitation from my friend Ishka, and she wanted me to come. My name is Illith. I know you haven't heard of me. I'm taking a vacation on Risa because I'm about to head to a brand new planet that Ishka told me about. And so I'm very interested in talking about my bestie friend and about how she brought a complete revolution to the planet of Ferenginar. I look up to her.
But do you have your Horgon?
I do. My whore, she gone.
Yes. All right.
Oh, sorry. Drinks. Cheers.
Cheers. Wrong franchise, but cheers.
Oh, close.
L'chaim.
So, Eve, you want to talk about my friend Ishka here?
Oh, yeah. By the way, love the outfit.
All right. So, I'll be going. Well, I want to tell you about this planet, and then I'll go.
Okay. Okay.
All right. So, there's this planet. Do you remember Pell? Do you remember Pell?
Sure.
Pell was the girl who tried to be a boy in order to break into the finances of Ferenginar. And it was her that found this really cool planet. And after women started wearing clothes and earning profit on Ferenginar, there was a very strong backlash. They didn't like it. And there was a lot of them that didn't like it. And so finally, in order to maintain their sense of independence, Pell found a planet, and Ishka is Harriet Tubman. I know you guys will get it. You're all humans.
I totally get the Harriet Tubman thing because Harriet Tubman shares my birthday.
Well, there you go. So Ishka, after all of what happens today, becomes a female revolutionary who is smuggling people along the Ferengi Underground Railroad, which is full of glitter, by the way. And
Of course.
So any questions about Ishka before I disappear? Because I'm getting a phone call from off screen. So I'm going to wait for that phone to arrive because I'm at a hotel and I don't answer my own phone.
You have a phone call from the front desk.
Hello? Ishka, I've been talking to my best friends about you. Oh my God, is there anything you want me to add? Oh, you had another ear lift? I can't believe it. All right. I have to go because there's this other person online named Dell who wants to say some stuff. So I'm going to go for now. All right, bye.
Okay.
You are totally a card, Dell. You're totally a card.
Yes.
The only thing I would change about your outfit is to add some fruit on top, and you could totally be doing like this Carmen Miranda in drag vibe.
Right?
It had been tried, but it kept falling off my head.
Fair.
That was amazing. That was incredible.
was.
Amazing. Show stopping. Never the same.
Go without me because it's going to take me 5 minutes to de-drag.
That's fine. Dustin's kind of disappeared too, apparently. At least I can't
weird.
see him.
How about we do introductions?
Yeah. Okay, I'll go first then because I'm at the top corner. I'm Lieutenant Commander Eve Zellick of the USS Lilith and Director of the Starfleet Academy College of Music.
My name is Scott, host of the YouTube channel Opinions No One Cares About.
My name is Vanessa, and I host a YouTube channel called I Love Bad Star Trek.
And I'm Dustin from here on Best of Trek, Worst of Trek.
And Dell we've already seen, so and Dell said they got a D-drag. So, Profit and Lace. The episode that Alexander Siddig regrets ever directing, the episode that Armin Shimmerman hated, probably one of the worst Deep Space Nine episodes ever aired, but also an example of when Star Trek had a good idea and then totally fucked it up on the execution. Because on the surface, it's Quark does drag. We've all seen the memes, like Star Trek when I'm watching it alone and it shows Captain Picard, and then it's like Star Trek with my parents and it's Quark in drag. We've all seen the memes, but I want to argue the fact that this episode actually does have a place in Star Trek. They totally foobarred it in the execution. And this might be controversial, and I'm going to do my best to not use triggering language or anything. But if I do, you guys can call me out on it. I'm not perfect. I do the best I can. I know this episode recently, like here in Canada, I don't know about the US, but here in Canada, it's Pride Month. So I know this episode has caused some issues in the LGBT community with people saying that it's transphobic or it's making fun of transgender. And Dell and I were back and forth on this for a little bit for me to try and get the wording right. The first thing I'm going to say is the episode, as awful as it is, has nothing to do with transgenderism, because transgenderism is not a choice. You are born who you are born, and transgender people are people who, from my understanding from my friend who I was with yesterday who's transitioning, transgender people are people who were born into the wrong body. It's not a choice. But at no time does Quark ever think he's a woman. At no time does Quark ever identify as a woman, want to be a woman, or even has any inkling of being anything other than a toxic male stereotype.
Extremely toxic given the beginning.
Yeah. So I just want to throw that out there, that it has nothing to do with transgenderism, because trans is not a choice, but what Quark did was still a choice. And that's why at the end he was so in a rush to get out of, all the surgery and everything. And it's not like we haven't seen, at the start of the episode, somebody is surgically altered into one alien, and by the end of the episode, they're surgically altered back. Deanna Troi as a Romulan comes to mind. So I just want to throw that out there, that it's not to do with transgenderism, but the so-and-so does drag to achieve a goal was a common 90s trope. Mrs. Doubtfire comes to mind. In Mrs. Doubtfire, he didn't identify as a woman. He didn't even want to be a woman. He was doing it so he could access his family and be with his family. So it's really more an indictment against family court. So with that out of the way,
I want to bring up a little bit of color to that too. I think it's when we bring up Mrs. Doubtfire, we're talking about socially acceptable drag queens. We're talking about Medea. We're talking about these other things that I think people who are trying to outlaw drag don't understand or don't comprehend that as being a drag queen. And I think it's important that we talk about what drag queens really are and the difference between trans women and drag queens. And I think that's why it's important when we talk about this episode that we keep the fact that even if Quark had surgery, surgery does not make the trans person. That was my little color and point in there.
Yeah.
No, and that's awesome. Like you and I back and forthed over this multiple times. And I really appreciate all the input that you gave me, and I appreciate any input you want to give in this episode, Dell, because
I'm just going to drink my crazy drink in the process.
I mean, I'm I will openly admit, as a cis bi female, I cannot fully understand or appreciate transgenderism, because transgenderism is something that nobody can appreciate unless you are transgender, because really you can't fully understand a person's experience unless you walk a mile in their shoes.
I think we should ask Scott about that, because he had some interesting things to say about that yesterday.
Okay, I didn't see Scott's comment, so go ahead, Scott.
Oh, it wasn't a comment. I put up on my channel an anti-transphobia video. But I agree with you, Eve. I can't identify as much as an actual trans person, despite being the parent of a trans child.
But still, being a parent of a trans child gives you a unique perspective.
I suppose, yeah. I mean, I did go off on this whole rant about, all we've done his entire life is, keep him fed, clothed, housed, taught, try to make sure he's a good person, and I think we succeeded. And he's happy, he's living his life the way he chooses. I'm not going to sit here and be upset about it because, he's not the girl that I literally watched being born.
I think it's important that we highlight how this is just part of raising a child to you, because just accepting who they are, because so many people, a lot of trans children are turned out and thrown out and not accepted and left to be in very vulnerable and dangerous situations. So there's that. Also, this is like a slight modulation to the language, not a huge thing, but ism makes it sound like it's an ideology. I want to be careful that we characterize transgendered people as transgendered. It's not an ism. That's all.
Okay. No, I appreciate the feedback. I respect that. Like I said at the start, I'm not perfect. I do the best I can. So if you guys got to correct me, go for it.
Nobody gets all this stuff perfect, Eve. I don't get all this stuff perfect. And I've been in the gay and trans community since the dinosaurs were protesting. And I get people's pronouns wrong. I get terms wrong. I'll say something that's politically incorrect because I'm old. I remember that happening when I was young, where the older people would say something racist and we'd all be like, ugh.
Yeah.
But if, I'm joking and I want to call my friend queer, even now I still have to be careful, because for some people that's still a bad word. I got up at a gay spiritual service and talked about being queer, and afterward this older gentleman came up to me and was like, queer is like pansy in my book. And so we had to have a talk about it, because queer is so important who I am. So I think that's why A, words matter, but B, intent to some degree also matters.
Exactly.
Yeah, no, I was talking about this episode at length with a friend of mine, and I won't say her name because I don't want to. I respect her privacy, but one of my friends was helping me with my garage sale yesterday, and we were talking about this episode, and my friend is transitioning. So through her, I'm learning a lot more about what being transgender really is and the reality of transgender. And she used to be in Starfleet with me, and like, even she knows I use sometimes the wrong word or whatever, but she also understands that even if I use a dumb word or if I screw up on a pronoun, it's not deliberate. It's just my heart's in the right place. My brain is just trying to catch up.
And I think what's important about that sort of thing when it comes to this episode is that it's a very nuanced episode that didn't emphasize the nuance enough, and Quark blows nuance out of the water.
Well, he's Quark.
But the idea being that once we see Quark in drag and all the jokes about Quark looking like a girl and acting like a girl, again, why it's not about transgenderism, because if people were teasing him about his gender, it would have been a whole different thing.
Yeah.
But I think it's important because a lot of Star Trek fans aren't exposed to this sort of nuance when it comes to queer community. I think that's why it's important to talk about this episode during Pride Month, even though a lot of people just dismiss it as bad representation of transgender issues. It's not a transgender episode.
Yeah,
Same as The Outcast, not a transgender episode. Being transgender was not something that was talked about even when DS9 was on the air.
Yeah.
I mean, there was RuPaul as a drag queen, but if you had to name one other, you'd probably be stuck for it. Maybe Lipsinka, maybe.
Divine.
Divine.
Yeah.
Because
But
of Little
Star
Mermaid.
Trek, but Star
Or
Trek
Damon.
fans on the general,
Yeah.
and I'm making an simple as I'm going to say I would assume aren't exposed to the kind of nuances that we are in the queer community. So I think that's why this episode is important to discuss, is that since we're a pretty diverse cast and we have a fair amount of queer people of one shade or another, or allies, I think we are the people to break this episode down and talk about how it's not about being trans.
All right.
Fair
So
enough.
what I want to do now, if everybody's okay, is move into what I think the episode was really trying to tell us and discuss it, which is female rights, which throughout history, women in almost all societies here on Earth have been at a disadvantage. Regardless of color of skin, women are always been second tier in society. And the reason I chose the title for this episode as Females in Finances Do Mix is because of the Ferengi rules of acquisition that says
49th,
females
I
in
believe.
finance don't mix.
Yeah.
Give me a second, I can tell you which one.
Yeah, I can't remember
I
which
think
exact
it's
rule, but
94th. It's the
Yes.
94th rule of acquisition.
Yeah.
yeah, females in
Okay,
finance don't mix. And one of the reasons they gave that women were not allowed to wear clothes in Ferengi society was because if they had clothes, they would have pockets. And if they had pockets, they would want profits for those pockets. And
I think what's
Vanessa's totally going to get me here. Women's clothes don't have usable pockets.
I also think it's an interesting comment because it's not if women wear clothes, we can't see them naked. It's them being naked is not a sexual thing. It
No.
is a dominance thing. It is a suppressive thing.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't know if Ferengi women are walking around on the streets naked.
They don't
but-
walk around on the streets. They're not allowed.
Exactly. I don't think so. And so I think the idea that the men think it's because it's about one thing, but really it's about practicality, I think talks a lot about who Ishka is as a female revolutionary or a feminist.
Yeah. She wears clothes. But at the same time, and this is kind of one of those things, we don't talk much about the couples of Star Trek, unless it's how bad some of them are. But Ishka and Grand Nagus Zek actually make a great team, especially as you see his deterioration as he gets older. And Ishka's the one who's helping him and holding the entire Ferengi alliance together because she has the ability, she has the lobes to do it.
I also think you have to bring up how they met because I think it shows where Zek made a decision in this too. So they met because she was sending him Tonga cues from the basement, and then they started interacting. But from the very get-go, here is Zek in a championship that he wins every year, and yet he's accepting and writing back to someone who's giving him hints from the women's pool. And I think that shows Zek recognizing that Ishka is smart and is someone worth having around. So I think their attraction is way beyond just, I think your lobes are sexy.
Yeah, no, I mean, Zek, when you see somebody who's even in human society, when you see somebody who's successful, and I'm using typical male persona here, but when you see a man who is typically successful financially and at life, if you notice, unless they're really moronic, most of them are actually with women who are incredibly smart and in some cases more educated than they are.
That's true.
I mean, Michelle Obama has a bigger education than Barack Obama did, for example. And I hate to bring this guy up, but carrot-faced Donald Trump, he's a successful businessman, whether he's an asshole, but he's a successful businessman, but his wife holds
Let's not even
2
use the word
degrees, and
successful
his
in
wife
that
holds 2
conversation.
degrees and speaks 6 languages. She's way more educated than he'll ever be. If you look at the most successful men in history, they're always with a woman who is intellectually on their level or
Are you
above
talking
them.
about his current wife or one of the 6
Yeah.
before?
Milena.
Okay.
Oh, burn.
Because to be fair, Milena has 2 degrees and speaks 6 languages. She's a very educated woman. And considering she came from poverty,
No offense, she does not come off as that anytime I've ever seen her
That's
speak
fair.
in public. But I mean, I don't know. I had no idea that she had advanced degrees. That's interesting.
she's from behind the Iron Curtain, and women behind the Iron Curtain, the reason why you see a lot of models is because models who grew up behind the Iron Curtain, modeling was a way for them to make money to support their families and get an education. And so she used her modeling to get her education and everything. And yeah, she speaks 6 languages and has 2 degrees. She's actually more educated than her husband. And so even if they're not great people, and I'll leave it at that, you have to respect the fact that she's another example of a woman who's married to a man who has power and money and has been successful in his arena, but she's more educated than him. And so Zek, to me, fits that profile because the most successful men in history either married a woman who was on their level or above, or were undone by a woman. Like Attila the Hun.
So
Attila the Hun brought the Roman
There's
Empire.
a much better example in American history of a first woman taking over for a president when a president could no longer do his job. Mamie Wilson was running the country. I think it's Mamie. I don't know. Maybe that's Mrs. Wilson was running the country.
Okay.
Woodrow Wilson was in bed. Also, FDR, severely disabled and got sicker.
Mhm.
Eleanor Roosevelt stood up and did a lot of the work of the presidency. So we can stay away from any kind of value judgments on what's going on currently, and we can look more historically at
I'm
women
only going
who have
with
always.
what I know.
I know that's why I'm bringing
To be
this up.
fair, for the listeners, I'm the only Canadian here, so if I'm fumbling on things to do with American or I only mention modern American stuff, I'm a Canadian, forgive me.
No, I get it. That's why I just wanted to bring something else into the conversation.
Yeah. But yeah, that to me, Zek, like I get why Zek would be fascinated with Ishka because she was not only on his level, she was in some ways above his level, and she challenged him. Because even he said that, part of what he loved about her was that she was different.
That's a pretty charitable interpretation of their relationship because what I got out of it, and was that Grand Nigga Zek saw somebody he could exploit. He saw the ambition in her and thought, well, I can appropriate her ideas as mine and we can, forge ahead together as like a power couple. But really the person who holds all the cards is him because he's a guy. Because
It's the guy, yeah.
it's still a patriarchal society.
Yes.
Like it's always on a man's terms. This whole episode, like I would love like Del mentioned prior that Ishka is more at the center, but it's really Grand Nigga Zek who's trying to get reinstated. That's the whole point of their sales pitch here.
Okay, I can see that. That's
I think
I didn't think of that until you brought it up, but I can see that.
I think some of that could be colored, not necessarily changed, but colored by the episode Family Business, or I'm sorry, the other one, Ferengi Love Songs.
Yes.
Because when Quark tries to be first clerk and fails terribly, it shows that he needs Ishka. Like maybe he could find someone else to do it, but he's found Ishka and he needs her. Not just because she is smarter, but she has better recollection and she understands that he has to be the face. And so she needs to do everything she can to make his face look good. I mean, I think that's important in any relationship, but especially if there's any smidge of a power dynamic angle, then usually it's the one behind the scenes that is making the one that gets all the attention look good. Not that I know anything about that.
The thing is too, like when we see Zek later in episodes where Zek's memory and his mind is failing because of age, and Quark interferes, and if I recall, it causes a huge collapse of Ferengi economic, causes a huge collapse in the Ferengi economy because Ferengi, that's literally religion for them. And then Quark realizes that it was Ishka who was helping to keep the stability by advising Zek. That's the only reason why I don't fully see it as Zek. Zek might have started out by exploiting her, but I think over time their relationship became more, he started to respect who she was and he really did need her. And we see Ferengi men, and look at Nog. You should shut up and look pretty on the double date. I didn't ask her to chew my food. Like, Ferengi men are pretty toxic, but when we see Ishka and Zek, we never actually see Zek treat Ishka in that stereotypical Ferengi male manner.
Can I screw up my face?
Go for it.
I would say just the interaction between Zek and Lita.
Which one was that? You got to help me.
So when he first meets, when Rom is like, "This is my beautiful wife, Lita," and Zek like hops up to her and is like, "Hey there," and Ishka's like, "She's Rom's wife," and he's like, "So?" And that when Ishka goes, "She's broke," like.
Yeah.
It showed a little bit of a maybe uneven power dynamic because something tells me if Ishka started flirting with Worf, there'd be issues.
Not to mention his immediate reaction was, "She doesn't look broke."
Right.
Really, like what it boils down to is commodification.
Yeah.
That Ishka is a high value item.
It's funny you mentioned a Ferengi and a Klingon because Quark and Grilka.
Yes.
Anyway, Vanessa was saying something.
Go for it, Vanessa.
No, I was just saying that, like, Gray Nigga Zek saw Ishka as a high value item. And, any threat to somebody taking that away from him, that's how he would treat it. But I also wanted to point out that Ishka's relationship with Zek is also transactional as well, because obviously he is the linchpin to entering any sort of arena of power at all. They even talk about in this episode how she wanted a female or herself to be Grand Nagus. So being right there at his side makes sense.
Yeah. If they both if both of them were treating it somewhat transactional, like even if they were, you can still see there's a genuine love or fondness for each other. Even if that wasn't how it started.
That's what marriages typically are, is like like for most of history has been a transactional relationship.
Tell me about it. Like Ishka, the fact that Ishka is smart enough that she still holds her own even against Ferengi patriarchal society, and the fact that she does forge her own path, She's literally, okay, I'm going to throw this out there. I won't speak to the United States side of things because I can't, but I can speak to the Canadian side of things. In the early 1900s in Alberta, actually, and I admit I'm a transplanted Albertan, but I know my Canadian history. In the early 1900s in Alberta, there was a female justice in the court, and she presided over a case where the criminal, who was, if I recall, he was a murderer, but I could be wrong. I just know he did something that he was caught red-handed. It was very obvious he was guilty. He refused to accept her sentence because under the British North America Act here in Canada, women were not defined as persons. Black men were persons. People of other races were persons unless they were Indigenous. The only people who had less status in Canadian society at that time than women were Indigenous. But women had no place in Canadian society. We were not persons. And so we had what was called the Persons case, where the famous 5, and I can't remember all their names, but it was 5 women fought for women in Canada, regardless of color, to be recognized as people. Because how can a woman birth children but not be a people? And it wasn't even until like the 1970s where women in Canada could have a credit card, women could own property, women could be autonomous. And I was the first and only female graduate of my university program. So for me, Ishka is like, whatever she had to do to get recognition, she was a badass.
I want to just jump in and read the names of the famous 5 because I think that's important for historical reasons.
I can't remember the names. I know Emily Murphy was one.
Yep. Maybe. So the names I have, and you can correct me, are Catherine Kalbeck, Elizabeth Hubley, the Honorable Marion L. Reed, Nancy Guptill, and Pat Mella or Maya.
Yeah.
Those are the names I have.
Yeah. And I will admit that those women, well, they still held, I'm not going to lie, they still held some racist beliefs against the Indigenous. And I will not, I'm not going to gloss over that. But the one thing they did fight for was that women are people. And I don't know when women's rights really took off in the US, so I can't speak to that for you guys, so I won't.
1920s.
Okay.
I don't know. I don't think
it depends
so.
on it depends on how you look at it. That's when it really kind of got.
Well, I mean, in the same way, the famous 5 were doing their work in 1929, which is about synonymous when American suffragette movement was happening in America. So it wasn't too far off time-wise. It was just, let's not talk about suffragetteness as necessarily being the same as personness. And I do believe that in our society, there is still some lack of personhood when it comes to being someone AFAB, whether they still are identify as female or not. So I wouldn't go so far as to like, everything's perfect now. And I don't even know that I would want to go so far as to say everything's perfect in the 23rd century. I think there should be some level of conflict so that there's some level of resolution.
Well, one thing I noticed about this episode, because you guys know I've been off the channel for a bit because of my head injury, and I didn't want to freak people out. Plus, I was trying to recover. But one thing I've noticed when I was on forums and things like this is any episode of Star Trek that touches on female representation and rights or LGBT representation and rights gets all the fanboys, and I'm using fanboys to mean the toxic stereotype weirdos.
Let's just call it fandom.
Okay. I didn't want to use fandom because fandom implies any gender, so that's why I'm saying fanboys.
Oh,
But
so you're calling out the boys. I thought I was looking for a non-gendered term.
I'm calling out the boys because who are the ones who have the biggest problem with the episodes of Star Trek that challenge gender roles, that
People with
challenge
traditional
LGBT
values. People
Let's
with
be honest,
traditional
straight white
values.
men mostly.
Christian
Yeah.
nationalists. I could go on forever how it doesn't matter what gender you are. But I understand the stereotype that you're trying to invoke of the sort of kind of fanboy.
Oh God, that was funny.
I do impressions.
I wanted to bring up a point real quick about the suffragette
Go.
movement. The reason that like it advanced at the rate that it did and was successful was because they stood on the necks of every other type of woman in order to do it. So white women got voting rights, but nobody else did. So I don't really see that as a place where we can say women are equal, because no. I think we are still in the throes of trying to figure out how to elevate all of us, has the tide rise all ships, not just people who are pale as a ghost like myself, like,
Or me. Other
yeah,
than my sunburn.
we got to
No.
stop, like, killing people in their sleep and things like that. Like, I just,
And that's part of the reason, Vanessa, why I said I won't speak to the US history, because in Canada, well, we're not perfect, and God knows we are far from perfect here. We don't necessarily have the same fractured relationship with people of color to the extent that some other countries do, because Canada was where, say, Harriet Tubman was leading people to move to, because in Canada, we have treated the Indigenous shamefully. And being born British Columbian, I know we treated the Chinese extremely shamefully. And I won't deny that, but here I know in the US, Black and white is such a trigger point. And in Canada, there's still some tension, but we don't have the same history because we didn't have the same relationship with those people, and I'm not trying to be dismissive by saying
Yeah.
those people. I'm just trying to be generic, but
Okay.
we didn't have the relationship with the Black people that the US has had.
like, there's a lot that this episode says about the intersection of gender and class too, because if
Yes.
Ishka was poor, if Quark was not necessarily business minded, I mean, how would have this turned out? Because the sales pitch is really the moment that mattered the most.
Yeah. And one thing I'll give Ishka, I mean, we've done episodes on the bad parents of Star Trek. Ishka has to be up there as one of the best moms we've ever seen.
The most patient mom.
Yeah, because I mean, her and Rom have a close bond, and Quark treats her like fucking crap. And yet, she even tells Quark that the only reason he has what he has is because he got it from her, not his father. And even though Quark treats Ishka like crap constantly over and over again, she still loves him. She's like the OG mom. She brought him into the world, and even if he's a dickhead, she still loves him. Ishka's a good mom.
Yeah, I think like the patience I think if my kid yelled at me to the point where I was completely incapacitated, which by the way fridges Ishka for the
Mhm.
remainder of the episode, like Ishka comes in hot and ready to, make the case to Sligo Cola guy, but then Cork comes in, screams in her face, and she falls flat. And then that's when the problems start,
Yeah. Well, I get why she falls flat because I'm not a parent, and I encourage Scott and Dustin to chime in because Scott and Dustin are the two people here who are parents. But I teach, and being a teacher in where I teach, I know my students for years, not just a few days, but I know them for years. And I've never understood the concept that if you bring a child into the world and you commit to raising them, and I'm not trying to diminish women who have to give up their child because of various reasons, and I won't even go into those reasons because I do not judge that, because if you cannot raise a child but you still birth them and then you give them to others who can raise them, that's awesome, because the point is that the child is safe and loved. So I'm going to encourage Dustin and Scott to chime in here, but when you commit to raising a child, why would you ever turn on them unless they become like a psychopathic murderer?
Yeah, Scott had to leave, and so Scott might have a good answer to that, but I don't, because I'm not that parent. I just want my kid to grow up being whoever she wants to be. That's pretty much it. And even if that, Dell and I had this discussion a couple months ago about like, oh, but what if she turns into being a Nazi? Everything I've seen in my existence says that you can't do, even as a parent, you can't do that much to keep your kids from being who they're going to be, even if that ends up being something bad. So all you can do is just keep putting out there, you be who you're going to be, put the positive images and the positive comparisons for them to work through, and that's all you can do. And all the rest is have a good time, try not to do anything that screws you up permanently.
Yeah.
That's it.
I'm not one. I would maybe draw some kind of line after they tried to kill me,
Yeah, that I get. You're talking to somebody who, my brother is a clinical psychopath, so I totally get you, Vanessa. It's pretty bad when my mom sits there and goes, your sibling must have been changed at birth. But that's why I wanted Dustin or Scott to chime in, because as parents, they've got a different perspective on, what it means to bring a child into the world and the level of commitment, even if your child doesn't turn out the way you want. Because I get that while Ishka's proud of Quark's lobes for business, he's not proud of who Quark is as a person.
Neither was my dad. He was very adamant with me that I was not what he had hoped. He really wanted me to squeeze out a baby and name it after him. Everything else,
Ew.
as long as those goals were happening, everything else was secondary. It was hilarious because he would steal my clothes a lot because I wore very masculine clothes, and he would steal my gay pride t-shirts, not realizing what he was wearing, which I always thought funny, and I never corrected him.
That's funny.
But no, I opened up last week. Let's just say my dad had a very clear image of what I was going to be, and the more I fell out of that, the less he wanted anything to do with me.
I think Quark
I
projects
follow
his
you,
own-
Del, because I follow you, Del, because I was a disappointment to my father. My father, on one hand, wanted me to go to university and be successful, but on the other hand, wanted me to be a traditional housewife.
I was just
I mean,
thinking,
or-
like, I don't think that like Ishka is disappointed in Quark as a person. I think Quark is disappointed in himself for running a bar and nothing else. And he projects that onto her.
Yeah.
Like, you're the disappointment. Like, no, she's clearly fine. It's him that is in hot water all the time, because
Well, and I
he's
think
always trying to make little deals on the side, and then Odo catches him and all that. So it's like he's kind of in hell, similar to Garrick.
Yeah, but Garrick, you can love Garrick.
Right. But Garrick doesn't want to be there in the beginning. He didn't want to be there. He wanted to be on Cardassia. He wanted to be in the Obsidian Order. He wanted his prestige and his spy position. He wanted
his life.
the accolades. Right. He didn't want to be there. So, Quark is similarly very like unhappy to be there. Sort of echoing back to like the EMH on Voyager, where it's like, I'm above this. I shouldn't be here, but I'm going to deal with it anyway, kind of thing. Although Quark does, is a very congenial person and likes the bar, he doesn't see himself as a financially successful Ferengi to the extent that others are.
Oh, I know. And then there's that line where Quark says, he goes on about don't trust humans, this, that, and don't trust a human who has a relative of yours in jail, because that's how Sisko got him to stay on and do the bar, because Nog was in jail. And Sisko basically told him, well, look at all the profit you can make if you stay, and I'll let your son out or your nephew out. But I mean, Prophet and Lace, I'll be honest, it's a gross episode. It's trash. It fails to really give the message, especially because we see at the beginning of the episode Quark sexually harassing, and I hope that's not bad for YouTube to say that word, but Quark sexually harassing one of his new employees. And then at the end, you get that 1 second where he's like, wait, I shouldn't have done that, because Quark gets sexually harassed. And then he totally blows it.
I mean, like, it doesn't take too much empathy or compassion or brain work to really think about, like, what would it be like if somebody walked up to you with a brochure of, how to do Umox or whatever. Umox for Fun and Profit. I think that's the name of the brochure.
Yeah, I think it's what it's called. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, it's essentially a brochure of how to suck dick to get ahead.
I mean,
you're worried about sexual harassment, but you're not worried about suck dick. Anyway.
Yeah. So like it was if he was given that brochure in a similar dynamic from his boss, would he be comfortable? Like, it doesn't take that much thought to think about, well, this might affect this person in a negative way. But I also thought that doing that didn't really make any sense, because first, he has hollow suites where people can already do that without, having to pay somebody else. So
oh my God.
He can completely have a 100% profit margin. So if we're just talking about economics, it doesn't really actually make sense to hire anybody. And then
Vanessa, you just reminded me of the episode where Kira finds out about Quark's hollow suite.
Yeah.
And Quark goes in, and he thinks it's Kira, and it turns out to be his head on Kira's body. I'm sorry, but
that's another thing. That's another like example of dressing up as a woman as a joke for Quark.
Yeah.
So that's why it was funny, because his head turned around and it was Quark,
Well, and they do that to Quark a lot, which I didn't want to necessarily bring into this conversation, but they do feminize Quark an awful lot. In the Jantara episode, he's the grandma character. And the thing is, he doesn't stand up and storm out. He just goes, when is this going to be over?
Another thing about the transgender argument is that, like, the people that the Armin Shimmerman studied when coming up for this role, Tootsie and Some Like It Hot. Those are drag performances, not
Yeah.
bosom buddies. It's bosom
Mhm.
buddies. It's not Orange is the New Black.
Yeah, well, Armin Shimmerman said that the biggest thing that bothered him about the episode was that even though Quark has to experience the sexual harassment that he's dealt over his career, at the very end of the episode, he doesn't learn his lesson. And to me, Star Trek failed. I love Star Trek, but they failed because if Quark had truly learned his lesson at the end of the episode, he would have.
He was also under the influence of hormones. That was really what motivated his being
but still.
understanding too. So it also genderizes hormones in this weird way that being a woman is being with estrogen, and estrogen means that you're compassionate as opposed to testosterone that doesn't. That's not how
bullshit.
Systems work.
I'm sorry, Dustin, if I'm swearing too much, but that's
I
bullshit.
don't think it matters.
Okay. It's bullshit because
We haven't
I
even had a
know
viewer.
No one's
men.
watching, so we're good.
Okay, I know men who are extremely passionate, and it has nothing to do with their hormones. They're just extremely passionate.
All right, as someone who has been on T and has had surges of estrogen and been on birth control, your brain is in a completely different place.
And birth control will fuck your brain. I know
Well,
that
that's
one.
the thing is that if you take excess, so for me personally, I have a bad reaction to estrogen, period. Like when I got my periods, I couldn't leave my house, not because I was in pain, but because I would have killed everyone I saw.
Fair.
When one of the times I was put on birth control, my partner came home and found me systematically breaking plates for no apparent reason. So hormones do affect the way you interact with the world. I don't think it takes as quickly as what they illustrate in the episode, but TV. But do I think someone who had been on estrogen, say, for a year, who came off it, who might still be kind of feeling the effects, but also feeling the T kind of reassert itself, can put someone in a very strange place of head. I mean, when I came off of T, it took me about a month or 2 months to really rejigger who I was, much less anything else.
You're so hitting a nail on the head right now, because yesterday I was really concerned about my friend because she was having some issues, and she's like, it's the T fighting with my estrogen and progesterone for her transition. She's like, the two of them fight, and sometimes it's extremely difficult for me to manage. So you're kind of hitting the nail on the head. And then for myself, I mean, I'm on permanent birth control because I'm bedridden by my own hormones. If I don't stay on birth control to arrest female things, but you totally hit the nail on the head, because you're totally saying what my friend was saying yesterday. Like I say, I'm not perfect, but I learn a lot, and I'm trying.
No one's perfect, sweetheart.
Yeah, of course. And I guess my point was, as soon as the estrogen wore off, he was back to his crappy self. It was entirely reliant on the substance in his body and not actually learning anything.
Yeah,
well, that's why Armin Shimmerman didn't like the episode, because Armin Shimmerman even said, I wanted Quark to realize what he was doing was toxic and inappropriate. But at the end of the day, the writers, Rick Berman, among others, because Rick Berman, we all know, was the reason behind a lot of toxic episodes. But he was like, the writers didn't want Quark to truly grow.
I think then they should have taken the episode in the complete opposite reaction. They should have played up the camp They should have never said the word surgery, because I think that's where a lot of people get hung up on this episode about being transgenderism. But I think if they really wanted it to be, I mean, if they wanted to take it away from the trans stuff, make it drag. Like, make it obviously drag. Bring in another drag Ferengi, or even another character who's willing to dress up and have some Like It Hot or bosom buddies, or even like, La Cage aux Folles type experiences. Like, lean into that rather than
Victor Victoria type of thing.
Yeah. Like, find something in there that you can play with that directly relates to drag, so that the episode, it's about Quark dressing up and it's not about Quark changing genders, not even once or twice. And that surgery is just a shortcut in Star Trek nomenclature for, no, he can't just take this off and it's all over.
Yeah. And I mean, I do somewhat compare this episode a little bit to Mrs. Doubtfire. And I know Mrs. Doubtfire is not Star Trek canon, but Robin Williams was a Star Trek fan. But that, that was another movie that came out about the same time as this episode. And it gets misinterpreted because never does Robin Williams' character think he's a woman or feel he's a woman or anything.
Or even wants to stay the way he is.
What I actually find
it's an indictment against family court.
Yeah. What's disturbing about that movie is that, like, first of all, if you lose custody of your children or visitation rights, there might be a good reason why. And so for him to be in that position in the first place, it's like, why did you lose custody? What's going on? And then secondly, the way that they found out that he was a drag queen, that it was Miss Doubtfire wasn't Miss Doubtfire, was his son found him in the bathroom, which is a whole other thing, And that's what happens when you have like straight people come up with these scenarios, because instead of embracing the dragginess of it, which even in that sort of like makeup montage, they sort of did. But ultimately it was a long-term performance with the intent to deceive. And I think a lot of people mistake that for what a transgender person's trying to accomplish when they transition, is deceiving people. And that whole deception mechanic is what is like with the surgeries is really like what it's like flames
shooting from my
breathing, heaving breaths.
Yeah. Vanessa,
we gotta wrap this up.
Vanessa, I totally hear you, and I totally respect your view, and you've actually given me things to think about. But the things I will say about Mrs. Doubtfire, for instance, and this is speaking from the perspective of the teacher, and I don't know about the US, but in Canada, teachers, even when we're outside the school system, we're what's called mandatory reporters. And mandatory reporting means if we suspect anything that could harm a child, we are required by law to report it.
I'm a mandated reporter in the United States because I'm registered with the government as a spiritual advisor. That's a long story. But in the United States, it's about children and elder abuse. If someone tells me like they're leaving their grandma alone for months at a time, I have to make a phone call about that too.
Okay, so you know what I mean. But I don't want to speak for anyone else on the panel because I'm a Canadian and Canadians are weird. But when I see Mrs. Doubtfire, one of the things I see really strongly is it's an indictment against the court system, because I have worked with children where, and to be fair, in Canada, I can't speak for the US, but in Canada, the court system is biased against the father, regardless.
Yeah, it's the same here.
So Mrs. Doubtfire to me is really an indictment of family court and how family court treats fathers, because there is nowhere in the movie you can say he's a bad dad.
Hey Eve, I love you forever. We are at time, so bring it back.
Yeah,
Sorry.
we gotta let's
Sorry.
let's do a quick out of 10, and then we'll get out of here. I am gonna give this a 1. Period. End of story. I don't even think I need to say why.
That's fine. I'm going to give the episode a 3 because it tried, it failed.
I'm gonna give it 2 because it's funny.
Of course.
It's funny. So I'm not gonna give it a 0 or a 1 because I put
It
it
is
on when I'm in
funny.
a bad mood and I want to laugh at something. I'll put that episode on in a heartbeat.
I
The
guess-
fact that you say it's funny, Del, love you.
Yeah. I'm going to maybe give it a 2 for maybe the same reason. I think I appreciate what it attempted to do, but I think it like Eve said, it failed. So
It's one of those moments in Star Trek where they had a great idea, like the Outcast, and they totally screwed it up.
Yeah, but
I
this
have
was
a- I don't know this-
didn't hit as many important points as the Outcast. At least the Outcast, it had that amazing speech.
right.
This has a great joke about being the acting Grand Nagus.
That so
and
the
that is
entire
not
intent was
enough.
to be a joke. That it wasn't to be making any sort of statement about gender or anything like that. They
Yeah.
just wanted to play up the drag thing and make another, Quark being feminine joke, and that's it.
But Ishka is one of the best moms in Star Trek. I think we can agree on that.
I also want to say in a time where LGBTQ authors are wacky under attack, that this is what happens when straight people do not even talk to gay people about queer issues, and they just go, "Oh, I can figure it out. Like, what would I do if I felt like no, not the same." And I
Like,
think
I'm
it was
bi-
only
I'm-
until it became more. I don't know what the word is, but like until they started talking to other queer people. I know Michael Pillar was queer, but I think he was dead by now.
I mean, I'm
but yeah.
I'm bi. I'm a cis female, but I'm bi. And I don't even understand all of it. And I always tell my friends in the LGBT community, I'm like, I don't always fully understand your life, your journey, what you are going through, but I'm here for you.
And I think that's the most important message that can be said about the episode in general, is that in the end, everything came out okay. Like nobody was injured, nobody got abused, no one like, I don't know, got stuck in a transition they didn't want to be in. Like
And Quark
in
got
the end,
sexually
everything
harassed.
yes. So everything in the end is good.
I'm sorry, but Quark getting sexually harassed by being chased around the room, that to me is still funny.
Whereas Pell was found
I'm with
out
you.
and banished forever.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
Pell and I would have been like friends. But watching Quark get abused, I'm not gonna lie, I loved watching Quark get a taste of his own medicine.
It is pretty
Right.
damn funny.
Yeah, it was.
All right, we're going to wrap this up, and we will be back next week. Maybe not Sunday, because for some reason Paramount has decided to release their flagship Star Trek show in the summer when nobody really watches anyway. So we might move our show around to different days and different times to accommodate everybody in their summer schedules. And thank you, Eve, for running this topic. Thank you, everybody, for showing up. Del, I loved your intro. That was a fun
It
little
was
piece of
so
writing.
Del,
It was so hard not to say anything. Like I dropped a hint to Vanessa last night because we were talking about Drag Race, and I was like, and she was like, I don't know. They were like, I don't know if I'm coming, and I was like, even if you don't come, tune in for the first 10 minutes. That was my one hint. So,
Yeah. And
but
Del,
it was so hard to keep undercover. I couldn't do the green screen thing because I didn't have time to practice before we started, so I had to use the virtual one to get the Ryza postcard.
yeah, Del was keeping me informed about what he was doing, and I was like, I love you, and goddamn, if I can ever get south of the border, you, me, we're meeting up.
Yes.
And
Also,
Rave
did you catch
and,
the did you catch the
and
did you catch
Rave
the
and
did you catch
Rave
the
and
character's
anybody
name?
else?
Did you catch my character's name?
Yes.
Okay, good. Then we can end it because that's all that matters.
Okay, great. We
And-
will see everybody next Sunday for Strange New Worlds or sometime. We love you all. Peace and I guess goodbye.
Live long and
Or-
prosper.